Good evening and welcome to the People's World Virtual Town Hall, People's Needs, Not Pentagon Greed. I'm CJ Atkins. I'm the managing editor for the People's World News website. Tonight's event, which is being broadcast live across the country, is the kickoff to a full weekend of discussions and debates focused on practical steps for organizing the movement for peace in our country. In New York, the activists who are gathered for the CPUSA Peace Conference are joining us at a watch party at Henry Winston Unity Hall. So to get us in the mood for everything that we're going to be talking about this evening, let's go to Manhattan for an introductory performance from Lucy Murphy, Ben Bath, and Lindsay Wilson. Go ahead.
My children are hungry, they're sick from the heat, while I pick the crop for others to eat, and you take my money, you think I don't see, you use it to fire on women like me. My children are ragged, their bodies are bare, while I sew the clothes for others to wear. And you take my money, you think I don't see, you use it to fire on women like me. I live in a dump, my landlord's no good, while I clean the house in a rich neighborhood. And you take my money, you think I don't see, you use it to fire on women like me. I wanted my children to have a good skill, but they go in your army and you teach them to kill. Why you take my children, you think I don't see, you teach them to fire on women like me. Now rifles and guns won't win anymore unless you've got something that's worth fighting for. But you take my children, you think I don't see, you use them to fire on women like me. But you take my children.
Right, thank you very much, Lucy, Ben, and Lindsay. We'll be hearing from some of them again later on in the program. Now, when this town hall and the peace conference were first being planned several months ago, the current brutal war in Gaza had not yet exploded. The focus then was on building support for some specific pieces of legislation in Congress that were aimed at funding human needs rather than war and Wall Street profiteering. But of course, the world doesn't stop moving while we make plans, and the campaign for a ceasefire in Gaza has moved to the center as the immediate demand of the peace movement. And that's a movement that's been reborn with force in just a matter of weeks. And that's proven by the millions of people who have been in the streets in the mass demonstrations over these past several days. At People's World, we also see this growth of the peace movement in our readership. Over 410,000 people have come to our website in the past month since this war started. 410,000. Now, you can compare that to the 268,000 from the month before. It's a 150% increase. And what they're coming there to find is the latest analysis of the Netanyahu government's apartheid schemes to expel Palestinians from Gaza, the complicity of US imperialism in the Biden administration, and the profiteering of the military-industrial complex, whose bank accounts are just getting bigger and bigger every day. If we look at the national polls, we also see, like Representative Rashida Tlaib said, that the people of our country are not with the president on this one. Nearly 70% of Americans, maybe even more by now, the latest numbers, support a ceasefire. And slowly, more and more members of Congress are also responding to that pressure and taking up the call. All of these numbers are a sign. And what they signify is that the fight for peace is even more important now, including pro-peace, pro-people legislation in Congress. And people are looking for what they can do in addition to marching and protesting and sharing the news. Well, the speakers that we've assembled for the panel this evening tonight, for all of you tonight, are going to be talking about some of the specifics in all those categories. Rossana Cambron is a member of Military Families Speak Out and an activist in Southern California with the Poor People's Campaign. She's also a national co-chair of the CPUSA. She's going to be speaking about how essential the fight for peace is right now, with a look at the unique role of women in the movement and the kind of broad unity that we're going to be needing if we're going to take on the war makers on Wall Street. John Braxton is a retired Teamster and a leader of Veterans and Labor for a Sustainable Future. His organization is campaigning around the People Over Pentagon bill, HR 1134. John's also part of the labor group that's backing Representative Cori Bush's call for a ceasefire, HR 786. Helen Jaccard is coordinator of the Golden Rule Peace Boat that toured the country this year to raise public awareness about the ongoing and the growing danger of nuclear war. She's on the executive board of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and she's long been a campaigner for peace and an advocate for the Nuclear Weapons Prohibition Treaty bill in Congress, HR 77. So the format tonight is going to be a round of presentations by the guests, about 10 to 12 minutes each. I'll be keeping time, so presenters, if I just briefly interrupt and give you the signal, that just means it's time to wrap up, okay? Following that, we'll have some time for Q&A from viewers around the country. And we ask that you start taking notes while you're listening to the presentations. Get ready for your questions. And we'll be using the Q&A feature on Zoom. You see it down at the bottom of your screen. Not the chat box, okay? The Q&A feature. And Taryn will be helping us to manage the Q&A session later on. Okay, let's get to it. And we'll hear first of all from Rossana Cambron, who is in New York. Go ahead, Rossana.
Thank you, CJ. Arise, then, women of this day. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether our baptism be that of water or of fears. We women of one country will be too tender to those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword of murder is not balance of justice. That's Julia Ward Howe, 1870, from her Mother's Day Proclamation for Peace. Many may not know that advocates for Mother's Day in the United States originally envisioned it as a day of peace, to honor and support mothers who lost sons and husbands to the bloodshed of civil war. At a time when our country is continuously engaged in devastating and costly wars, and our communities are suffering with lack of affordable health care, housing, food scarcity, it's time for Mother's Day to return to its roots and call for peace. On November 1st, 1961, at the height of the Cold War, about 50,000 women marched in 60 cities in the United States to demonstrate against nuclear weapons under the slogan, "End the arms race, not the human race." A march called by Women's Strike for Peace. We might think about such an action today. As women, mothers, we recognize that a decent life is impossible without a peaceful world. Our tax dollars are funneled into warfare instead of addressing poverty, ensuring affordable housing, and providing health care for the citizens who dutifully pay their taxes. The reality of war, as we've witnessed, is terrifying. It doesn't resolve conflicts, but breeds more adversaries and divisions. Did you know that the Pentagon has not passed an audit? Did you know that according to data for progress since the 1990s, when the federal government required all agencies to pass independent audits on their spending habits, the Department of Defense has been the only government agency unable to pass a single audit. Some defense officials have found it difficult to audit government property that they own, as some private contractors have not been willing to cooperate with their audit procedures. Opposition to the current military budget continues to grow, and that is good. But we must all take the next steps by taking action at the ballot box, on the streets, and the offices of our congressmen and senators, writing op-eds for our local newspaper, expressing our opposition, etc. We have the power and the numbers to change things, but we need to take steps towards it. How many of us have the idea that because our military budget is so high that the soldiers and their families are well paid? Well, I can tell you firsthand, they are not. Many families, according to Army statistics, have to apply for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as SNAP. They do not make enough to provide for their families. According to the Institute for Policy Studies, poverty is the 4th leading cause of death in our country, not war. Study after study has shown that there is enough to provide all the basic needs for everyone in this country. So it is not for lack of funds, but lack of interest by legislators. The military budget comes from our tax dollars. So when we ask to cut the military budget and move the money to repair our infrastructure, use it to provide affordable housing, universal health care, we are not asking for a handout. And we are certainly not taking it from our men and women serving the military. The authorization for use of military force, AUMF, under Article 2 of the Constitution states, the President has broad authority as Commander-in-Chief and Chief Executive to order the use of force by the U.S. military. The President's Article 2 powers include authority not only to order the use of military force to defend the United States and U.S. persons against actual or anticipated attacks, but also to advance other important national interests. Congress has the constitutional responsibility to not only authorize, but to limit the President's power to use force. Repealing the current 2001 and 2002 AUMFs would reassert Congress's Article 1 constitutional duty to determine if and when the United States goes to war. War is a complex thing. It affects many people, and it should not be left to one person's discretion. It requires a collective, well-thought-out process. We cannot demand any less. In the face of massive suffering in Gaza and disregard for international law by the Israeli government, the U.S. must not provide additional military aid or weapons that could cause more deaths. Instead, the U.S. should use its considerable diplomatic strength to call for an immediate ceasefire. We must demand the Biden administration act now to end the war and to help bring about a political solution that upholds the rights of Palestinian people. This must include ending military support to Israel. We call on the people of our country to make their feelings known in every way possible, including protest. I want to emphasize that we have the majority of people that want change. They want the money spent elsewhere, but they may not know how to make that happen. We are here to let them know and we are here to let them know how, and that it is possible to make the change that they are looking for. We should be against all crimes against humanity. What is happening in Gaza, from the bombing and taking of hostages to the bombing of hospitals and killing of innocent people, these innocent families, we need to say enough. No more of our tax dollars are to be used for this purpose. Move the money and end poverty in our country. Let's get out there and build movements. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Rossana. I couldn't have thought of a better way to start than that poem that you recited. We're going to hear next from John Braxton, and if you're ready, John, go ahead. And remember, to the audience, start taking notes of your questions for our speakers. Go ahead, John.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel, and I very much appreciated the opening remarks, right on target, to use a military analogy, which I can't seem to avoid somehow. And as you stated in the introductions, when we first started thinking about this panel, we were not in the middle of a crisis in Gaza. And so I just want to say, to start with, that our hearts go out to all the people in Israel and in Palestine and in Gaza who have been killed, who've been wounded, who have been displaced by this terrible thing, that there is no justification for the war crimes that both sides have committed here, but that what needs to happen is a ceasefire. That we have to stop the killing now, and it is encouraging to me that there have been so many people that have come out of seemingly nowhere, because the peace movement has been really in hiding for a long time. But it's clear that the people of the world want peace. It's ironic that Dwight D. Eisenhower was somebody who said near the end of his career as president, and I certainly don't think of Dwight D. Eisenhower as somebody that I mainly look up to as a person of peace, but he did say, at some point, the leaders are just going to have to get out of the way of the people, and because the people want peace. And I'll also start off with another quote from Eisenhower, just to indicate that in some ways, what we're advocating here is not radical at all. And Eisenhower at one point said, I'll just read it, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone, it is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron." And that's certainly more true today than ever before. And so I think, we can look back historically and say the peace movement was a key factor in being able to end the war in Vietnam. And that's important to notice, that the United States was the biggest military power in the history of the world, and was defeated by an army of people who just wouldn't give up in Vietnam, and by also the peace movement here that made it politically impossible for our so-called leaders to continue to carry out the slaughter that they were carrying out in Vietnam. And I say that just because I think it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to think, what difference does anything we do make? And I think the reality is that it's people's movements that ultimately do make the big changes, and they don't necessarily happen overnight. And of course, the leaders don't give credit to the movements when they do happen. But ultimately, it was the peace movement that made it politically impossible to continue the war in Vietnam. It was the peace movement, the outcry in the streets, that led, I think, to a very large extent to the nomination of Barack Obama. And Barack Obama then did pull us out of Iraq. And so I think that we can take some heart in these historical precedents while we're in this terrible time right now. And so the main involvement that I've had over the last couple of months before the crisis in Gaza struck has been starting a campaign that we call Veterans and Labor for Sensible Priorities. And it's a project that is endorsed by Veterans for Peace nationally, and carried out by a number of labor leaders. And what we're really trying to do is to take a look at the Pentagon budget. And I think it's important to not call it the defense budget. I think this is a terminology that, we didn't used to have a Department of Defense, we had a Department of War. And that's really what we should call it now, a Department of War and a war budget. And the war budget for the United States, for the Pentagon, is approximately $900 billion, officially slightly less than $900 billion. That's the actual Pentagon budget. And then there's actually quite a bit more money. So it goes way over $1 trillion if we're looking at all the money that goes, for example, that would go to Israel for the extra armaments, and into the war in Ukraine, and into the drone attacks that the United States has carried out in many, many countries. And so what Eisenhower was talking about there was this terrible waste of money. And I come from a labor background, and I come from a peace movement background and a labor movement background, and I'm proud of both. And sometimes it's been very hard to unite those two. And part of the reason is that in this capitalist economy, people get jobs where they can get jobs. So I don't think most of the people that are building the planes and tanks and gunships are doing it because they want to create wars around the world. They're doing it to survive. They're doing it to put bread on the table and to pay their mortgages and to get their kids to college. But in this country, then there's this huge industry that, again, Eisenhower talked about, the military-industrial complex, that essentially bribes Congress people in virtually every district in the country and says, we will put a manufacturing plant in your district, and that's jobs. And essentially says, we dare you to oppose that because your people, we know your people need the jobs. And at the same time, of course, those defense industries, and there I go using the word, those war industries are also saying to those Congress people, and if you do support this, if you do support our budget requests, then we have a lot of money to give you. We can put a lot of money into your campaign. So, and then a lot of those Congress people, when they leave Congress, they turn around and they become consultants for the war industry. They turn around and they lobby for more funds for the war industry. So the amazing thing is that when the Pentagon comes up with its budget every year, and it goes up every year, no matter how much the Republicans in particular will say, oh, we really can't afford deficit spending, but you don't ever hear them talk about that in terms of war spending. So the Pentagon budget goes up every year. And what does Congress do? it takes that budget request and it says it wasn't big enough, and it puts more money into it. And it's just kind of incredible, but it's true. And so we have that almost $900 billion that goes into the strictly defined Pentagon budget, and the over $1 trillion that goes into the overall military budget. That money could be spent in so many different ways, and it dwarfs what the rest of the world does. So it's more than the next 9 nations put together. So if you talk about who our so-called adversaries are, whether it's China, and I emphasize so-called there, whether it's China or Russia, those add all of those 9 nations together, and the United States military budget vastly surpasses that. And of course, a lot of those 9 nations are supposedly our allies. So if you include the NATO countries in that, then the amount of money that's on, quote, the United States side is way, way, way more. And so Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who is, I think, one of the most courageous Congress people that we have, she was the only one that was willing to vote against the authorization of military force bill that was put forth right after 9/11. And she saw the problem and said, this is a blank check for the military. We're telling them that they can go bomb wherever they want, and we're giving them permission to do that. So she was very far-sighted then, and today she's put forward a bill along with Congressman Mark Pocan from Wisconsin that is a call to cut the Pentagon budget by $100 billion. That $100 billion is really only about 11% of the overall military budget, the overall Pentagon budget. And again, it's even a smaller percentage when you include the things that take the military budget over $1 trillion. And so she's really saying there's far better ways to spend this money. And one of the things that I wanted to just do was just kind of look at what some of the choices are, what are some of the trade-offs here. So we could, with that $100 billion, if we could save $100 billion from the Pentagon budget, first of all, I want to say that would still put us higher than all of our so-called adversaries put together, way higher than that. So we could cut $100 billion out and still have the by far the largest military budget in the world. But what could we do with it? We could hire registered nurses, 60,000, more than 60,000 nurses for a whole year if we cut by $100 billion. We could build public housing for a year for nearly 800,000 people. And we all know that public housing is badly needed right now. People talk about raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour. We could create 176,000 jobs at $15 an hour plus benefits for a year. And presumably we would then keep this cut year after year after year. We could hire 79,000 elementary school teachers. And we know that elementary school teaching is the foundation for people to get a good education. We could have 44,000 clean energy jobs. And this is all of these things put together. These aren't choices. We could do all of these things put together, and the list goes on. We could give military veterans receiving Veterans Administration care. We could give 450,000 of them that care for a year. Scholarships for university students, 200,000. The list goes on and on. Solar panels. We could create 19 million households with solar electricity for a year. Wind turbines and so forth. So some people ask the question, well, why is this issue a labor issue? Well, it's a labor issue because our working class people I'm quite confident they would much rather be building solar panels and windmills and mass transit that would cut down then on the emissions by the military. And they'd much rather be doing that. But our capitalist society doesn't give them that choice. And so $100 billion could be a key step in the right direction. I also want to point out that the Pentagon is the largest single user of fossil fuels in the whole world. And therefore, it's the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And so the issues of climate change and militarism are completely intertwined with each other. And so a cutback in the military spending is also a step in the direction of green jobs. And the thing I would also add to that is we would need to have some kind of important provisions so that the people who are now doing military jobs in the war industries have jobs. So we need to have just transition. A lot of people have talked about a just transition needed away from fossil fuel workers, and we absolutely need that. But we also need to have a just transition for military workers so that they can know that they have jobs, that they can transition to jobs that will carry them on into their pension years. And so a small portion of that $100 billion could be dedicated to that just transition. So people get the training that they need, so that communities which depend right now on the war industries, many communities depend on the war industries for their tax base. So we need to have federal investment programs that would guarantee jobs in those communities and give priority to people who are now working in the war industries and in the fossil fuel industries. So I know that my time is coming to an end. And so I just wanted to close with one more quote. And this one is from a very different person than Dwight D. Eisenhower, who I quoted at the beginning. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. Martin Luther King Jr., 1967. So he said that was true in 1967, and it's all the more true today. And so at some point, I'll just mention how you can be in touch with us that are working on this project of veterans and labor for sensible priorities. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. You know, we often think about this Pentagon budget as this huge thing, and all the zeros in the billions and trillions are hard to grasp. But you've really put it in perspective. You know, some of the economics of war, what that means in terms of jobs, of houses, of university scholarships, teachers. So I think that's really important information for us to all have. So thanks for that. Before I go to Helen, just another reminder to the audience, be putting your questions in. Taryn is gathering those up, so we'll be using those in the Q&A session shortly. Okay, let's go to Helen Jaccard from the Golden Peace Boat Tour. We covered the route of the Peace Boat in several articles in People's World, so it's good to hear from one of the people behind that. Go ahead, Helen.
Great, thank you. Is it all right for me to share my screen here? Well, looks like I did, so there we go. Yeah. All right, so thank you very much to Henry Lohendorf for inviting me to today's town hall, and I am definitely in agreement with both Rossana and John about the underlying problems that we're facing come from an aggressive military policy and interfering in the affairs of other countries and profit. And why does the government pay all this money to give it all this profit to the profiteers of the military industrial complex? They're bribed to do so. But, that could change. And I definitely agree about the transition issue. I talk about it quite a bit when we're sailing on the Golden Rule. So today I'm going to talk about Veterans for Peace, our historic anti-nuclear sailboat, the Golden Rule, and our shared mission to eliminate nuclear weapons. Veterans for Peace is the owner of the Golden Rule, and it has over 100 chapters, 10 of which are international, and we have over 3,000 members. One of the tenets of Veterans for Peace is to end the arms race and ultimately eliminate nuclear weapons. So just a little bit of background. From 1946 to 1958, the United States detonated 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands. And that brought about a bunch of radioactive particles that don't exist in nature blowing all around the planet. People were trying to stop that, and they weren't getting any traction with demonstrations and calling Congress and the president. So this group of Quakers and other activists bought the Golden Rule and decided to sail her into the nuclear testing zone in the Marshall Islands. This was 1958. The strontium-90 that was blowing in the atmosphere was getting into mother's milk, cow's milk, baby's teeth and bones, and women were measuring their milk for radiation before feeding it to their babies. This is the Golden Rule in 1958, and this is on the way to Hawaii. So they got to Honolulu and resupplied and headed out. The first captain of the Golden Rule, by the way, Bert Bigelow, had been a Navy commander and was captain of a boat that was approaching Pearl Harbor at the time that the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He quit his commission out of protest of the dropping of those bombs and was very proud to do so. So he was a great person to represent the group that decided to sail the Golden Rule. Now they got to Honolulu and they headed back out to the ocean to try to get to the Marshall Islands. And the Coast Guard caught up with them, brought them back, and put the crew in jail. And while the crew was in jail, a second boat came along, learned about the story. This was the Phoenix of Hiroshima, which John Braxton has sailed on subsequent missions, including to Vietnam. And that boat, that crew took the baton from the Golden Rule, and they did make it to the Marshall Islands while the crew of the Golden Rule was in jail. The arrest of the crew brought about such a huge backlash that it increased the anti-nuclear movement of the time by many factors. People were out in the streets much more than they had been. Ultimately, they gave President Kennedy the political cover that he needed to sign the Limited Test Ban Treaty of 1963. This is the crew of the Phoenix of Hiroshima at the time. After this action in 1958, the Golden Rule was sold into private hands. It eventually sank in far northern California, and this is what she looked like in 2010. When Veterans for Peace found her and decided to restore her, it took 5 years. So in 2015, the Golden Rule was relaunched. The Phoenix sank in a separate incident also in Northern California. And on the same day that the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons passed, the Golden Rule was sailing right on top of the Phoenix, which is under 25 feet of water. So after 5 years, the Golden Rule was restored and relaunched. And the first 4 sailing seasons were up and down the US West Coast. But then President Trump and Kim of North Korea were threatening each other's countries with nuclear war, and Veterans for Peace decided that the Golden Rule should head back out into the Pacific to see what they could do about stopping the possibility of nuclear war. And upper right corner, there's the Phoenix, the last time she was above water. So we prepared the Golden Rule and did sail to Hawaii once again. This time we sailed for almost 2 years all around the Hawaiian Islands, visiting every place we could get to. And we prepared to set out towards the Marshall Islands, where we hadn't ever gotten before, then on to Guam, Okinawa, and Japan for the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the bombs. But this was March of 2020, and unfortunately, the Golden Rule couldn't sail because of COVID. So we brought the Golden Rule back to the United States. This is a picture of the Golden Rule in 1958 and in 2018. When we got back to the United States, we decided to fulfill the dream of the people who had rebuilt her, which is to travel to all of the navigable waters of the United States. So we just got finished sailing around the Great Loop. It took a year. We stopped in 100 different ports of call. We gave over 300 educational presentations along the way. And we visited Cuba, by the way. So here's kind of what our program is. We give our presentations. We demonstrate against Fleet Week, including 5 places on the West Coast and New York City. We protest at nuclear weapons facilities, including the nuclear submarine bases, both of them. Take people sailing. We have boat tours. We have guest sailors. The person on the right is Anne Wright. She's very famous in peace circles. We remember the Marshall Islanders, who were among some of the first nuclear victims. And so here we are in Honolulu with a bunch of Marshall Islanders, and we met with them again along the Great Loop, a different group, 800 people in a community in Dubuque, Iowa on the Mississippi River. All right, so we support, of course, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And we also support the Back from the Brink measures. Back from the Brink was started by Ira Helfand and Physicians for Social Responsibility soon after the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was passed. This campaign calls for global elimination of nuclear weapons, to end the sole authority of the president to launch a nuclear strike, to take our weapons off of hair trigger alert, to cancel the nuclear modernization program, and to declare a no first use of nuclear weapons policy. Back from the Brink is encouraging people, as we do, to engage in actions. So what we try to do is give people hope through taking action. We are taking action, and we encourage other people to do so as well. So you can engage on social media. You can talk to your elected officials, get them to endorse the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons or the Back from the Brink campaign, or both. You can write letters to the editor, op-eds, get yourself on a radio show or even a TV show, work with others in your own community. And what the Golden Rule did a lot of was to try to get people locally to pass resolutions in favor of the Back from the Brink measures as part of welcoming the Golden Rule to their city. Another aspect of Veterans for Peace is our Nuclear Abolition Working Group. We call it VFP No Nukes. And we came up with a nuclear posture review in contrast to the aggressive posture of the United States towards other countries. We analyzed the relationship between the United States and other nuclear armed countries and figured out that if we did aggressive diplomacy instead of aggressive militarism, we could get to nuclear zero. And this nuclear posture review is a roadmap for doing that. And here's some things from ICANN and the things from our nuclear posture review. You can go to tinyurl.com/VFP-NPR and download the nuclear posture review that we took to every member of Congress when we were in Washington, D.C. We also met with the United Nations, representatives from 13 different countries, including Cuba. And now we're getting ready to start planning for next year. So there's a whole lot more you can say about the Golden Rule Project and transitioning, things like that, but I think I'll leave it at that and let other people have a chance to talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen, for giving us that info on, a regular, live, moving, constant demonstration for peace, which is really what the golden rule is. Okay, we're about to move into the Q&A, but I just want to also let people know that you should tune in tomorrow for the Peace Conference. We had another speaker who was expected to be with us tonight, but we could not connect with her in time. And that's Ada Tuman-Sleeman. She is a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, representing the Communist Party of Israel, right there in the war zone. And so she knows better than anyone, what it means to fight for a ceasefire right now. So as I said, she was going to be joining us tonight, but she could not. But she will be addressing the conference tomorrow at 11:15 a.m. Eastern time, I believe. So that, as well as a lot of other interesting sessions, will be live streamed. So check that out if you can. Okay, we've been getting a few questions already. So I'll start off with one that comes from Benjamin in Texas. And I know a lot of different organizations were mentioned by the panelists, so they will probably have some answers. But Benjamin asks, where can I find out more information on how to get involved as a peace-minded veteran? So Ben is a peace-minded veteran. He's looking for ways to get involved. So anyone on the panel who wants to speak up on that one, go ahead. Helen, you got your hand up first, so go ahead.
Well, I can certainly think of veteransforpeace.org is the one that's obvious. If you're a younger veteran, you might check out About Face, which used to be called Iraq Veterans Against the War.
And I could add to that, I was also going to say that same website. And if you go to that website, one of the tabs says Take Action. And if you go to the Take Action, then scroll down, and there's one that says Climate Crisis and Militarism. And if you go there, that will take you to the work of Veterans and Labor for Sensible Priorities. There's also, I could give you an email address that you can just email us if you want, which is labor@veteransforpeace.org. So if you're a member of any kind of a labor organization or if you're a veteran, we would love to hear from you, because what we're doing is we're getting both individual veterans and individual working people to sign on to support Barbara Lee's bill to cut the Pentagon budget. And we're also then asking those people to go to their unions and other labor organizations and ask those organizations to endorse Barbara Lee's bill. And we can help you with that. We can provide resources so that you're not going unarmed. Again, it's hard to describe all this without using military analogies, but you will go armed with lots of information to a union meeting and talk about why this is a labor issue. People sometimes say, well, isn't labor just about wages and hours and working conditions? And yes, but we don't have much in the way of working conditions if we have a nuclear war. So, and of course, it's our tax dollars that are paying for these wars and war preparations, and it's working people that fight these wars. So it all comes down to labor. The 1% always find a way to get out of their obligations, whether it's taxes or the actual fights. So go to that website or send us an email, and we would love to spread this further. So far, there are about 10 labor organizations that have signed on to supporting Barbara Lee's bill. And that's just within the last couple of months that we've been organizing this. So we hope to get this to be many times that number. And we hope that people on this call can sign up and get involved in that.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know Rossana is with, what's the name of your organization, Rossana?
Yeah, Military Families Speak Out. It's an organization that where we have loved ones in the military, but we speak out against the war and also take care of them when they come home.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, we have another question from Matthew, and Matthew is worried about the 2024 elections and how it relates to the current war in Gaza. So Matthew writes in, I'm very concerned that Biden's support for the Israeli government will lose him many votes, particularly in so-called battleground states like Michigan, which has a large number of Arab American voters, youth voters, voters of color. He only won Michigan by 10,000 votes. How to proceed? How do we proceed toward preventing a Trump victory in this kind of situation? And Matt says, you know, it's getting harder to convince people when Joe Biden, President Joe Biden is backing a number of wars and a new Cold War with China as well. So we throw that question out to the panelists to get your thoughts on how we approach the upcoming elections. Who would like to speak up first?
I'll give it a.
Rossana is smiling.
I'll start
Go
off.
ahead.
It is concerning, but I think that we have to really stay focused. The threat of fascism is real, and that has to be our central focus. We have to be able to understand that it's the people's movements that bring about change, and we can bring about change under a Biden administration than under a Trump administration. It would be easier, in my opinion. So we can't lose focus of the threat of fascism. That's so key.
I could just chime in on that. I would have said something very similar. I think that we have to, I think that we really have an obligation to our integrity to speak out against what's going on in Gaza. And so we have to hold the president's feet to the fire because it is genocide that's going on there. And so we can't remain silent just because we think Biden's a better alternative than Trump. We need to hold his feet to the fire and do as much as we can to stop this genocide. And then we need to go out and talk to people and say, it'll be far worse under a Trump presidency. So we don't have to be, we don't have to say that we agree with everything that Biden does. And it won't win us votes if we do say that we agree with everything that Biden does. But I think that we can do both. I think we can both be critical of his policies in Gaza in particular, and at the same time tell people, but you know, it was Trump that agreed to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, which was a terrible idea, and it's Trump that has been thoroughly backing Netanyahu all along, and Biden has, to his partial credit, been critical of Netanyahu and continues to be critical of him today. Not critical enough. Biden should be calling for a ceasefire, and he should be using all of the US's incredible resources to tell Netanyahu, we have to settle this age-old problem, not just get the hostages returned, but actually settle this problem and develop a solution where Israeli people and Palestinian people can actually live together in peace. But Trump is not going to help with that at all. So it's a little bit, it's very difficult. It's not as easy as walking and chewing gum at the same time, but we have to figure out how to do both. I think that those are it's tough times that we're in, but we have no other choice but to take both a strong stand about what Biden is doing now, and also a strong stand against a possible reelection of Trump.
Helen, yeah.
Don't agree with buying into the duopoly to this extent. The war party is both parties. And I think that we need to stop sending weapons to Israel, to Ukraine, and Taiwan. And I think that we need to stop preparing for war, world war with both Russia and China. I'm personally voting for Cornel West.
Okay. Our next question is from Norman Markowitz, who's a professor in New Jersey. And I think this one is probably more directed for you, Helen. And Norman writes about Albert Bigelow, who 3 years after he sailed into the Marshall Islands nuclear test zone was one of the original Freedom Riders. And he was beaten by the police when he was helping John Lewis, who was being attacked. And so Norman's question is, what do you see as is the relationship between the peace movement and the larger movement for civil rights and for social justice?
Well, it's very much embedded, and it's our job as peacemakers both to eliminate war and the possibility of nuclear war, to go out and make all those connections, even if it's just financial, as John was talking about. You know, we have to do this everywhere. We have to say we need an economic transition, like Eleanor Holmes Norton says in her bill to eliminate nuclear weapons. So let's all just get out there and attend wherever other people are meeting. Go to the climate marches. Go to the Poor People's Campaign. Put yourself in there and bring the message of peace to everybody's platform.
Could I chime in on this also?
Yeah.
And in a way, this is a postscript to what I was saying before, but about the relationship between these various movements. Martin Luther King, in his last year, made the very courageous decision to come out against the Vietnam War. And in a way, this was a similar situation to what we face today. So most of his advisors, nearly the whole upper echelon of the civil rights movement said to him, don't do this, keep your focus on civil rights. We can't afford to criticize Lyndon Johnson because he's our ally in the White House. And King said, I have to, I can't as a person of conscience come out and support this war in Vietnam. And what he increasingly saw as being crucial was that the peace movement, he talked about at the time there being three great evils, the evil of racism, the evil of poverty, and the evil of militarism. And he said they're all linked and we have to fight them together. And so he took that long view and he said, I'm going to criticize the president and I'm going to hold out for policies that help out everyone. And of course, he talked then, as I mentioned before, about military spending and how at one point he said, the bombs that explode in Vietnam also explode in our ghettos at home. And so all of these movements are completely linked together.
All right. Thank you, John. The next question comes from me because I've been listening to what all the panelists have been saying, and I'm thinking back to even some of the things I said in the intro, which is when this conference was being planned, part of it was about how do we revive the peace movement, right? Well, here we are a month into this awful war, and the peace movement doesn't need any reviving. Millions of people are in the streets. A lot of cities are seeing their biggest demonstrations possibly ever, but certainly since the days of the Iraq War. And so the question that I keep thinking about is, how do we sustain this? Can this current upsurge, can it lead to the birth of a lasting, new, broad, multiracial, working class-led peace movement? Because even if there is some temporary ceasefire or halt to the open hostilities in Gaza, there are still so many things, right, that we need to be working on when it comes to peace. So that's my question. How do we make this moment of of anger and crying out for justice? How do we make it last? So I open it to anyone. I don't know who wants to speak first. Who's got something to say about this? I guess it's the question of the day, kind of, right? But Rossana?
Yeah, I think it is the question of the day. I think that we can, I think this conference that's coming, tomorrow, even beginning with the town hall, is going to tackle that question. It's a really important question about how do we sustain any movement when it has an upsurge this way. And I think that we have to be disciplined, we have to be steadfast, we have to be able to not give up and not lose hope, even though it may seem hopeless, but we have to, because there's so many people suffering, and what happens in this country affects the world. And I think that we can gain that motivation and that hope from watching the world, including our country, step up in a way that we had never even thought was possible. We have not seen this kind of reaction to something, I don't believe ever, in this magnitude, where you have, people taking action in all forms, from stopping the ships in the ports, from going to members of Congress, to calling out members of Congress and senators as they're walking through the halls, from demonstration after demonstration throughout the world, worker solidarity, workers, unions calling for boycotts or, a ceasefire, and taking that on as part of their call and part of their work. All throughout the world, we see these actions, and we have to find ways to support it and learn the power of the people, and learn that we got to keep going and pushing and really feel that solidarity that is coming through in this period. And I think that we can really gain an understanding and a commitment, and see the power that it has, and the power that we can gain and move into our communities and promote it, be able to organize here and there, and utilize it in every way that we can within the communities that we're involved with. And if we're not involved with, take that hold and make it, link that up to whatever, even in our jobs or our families, link it up to what's happening here in our country as well. That's what I think so far.
The big assignment for us, right? A lot of things that we need to link it to.
Right.
John, you as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that. And of course, I totally agree with what Rossana said and appreciate what she said very much. And I think partly what we need to do is to have a big program of educating people about how these issues are connected. Because there's a lot that people don't know. We've been under a propaganda regime for decades and decades and decades. And I know that I was subject to this when I was born in 1948. And so I was a child in the 50s. And even though I had a Quaker background, I grew up feeling like the United States was the beacon of freedom and democracy all around the world. Well, if you look at, and that the Vietnam War was just kind of a departure somehow, a big mistake. Well, of course, it was a huge mistake, but it was also very consistent with what our entire foreign policy was. And so if you look at the United States record, we overthrew a democratically elected leader in Iran because, lo and behold, he believed that the oil should belong to the Iranians. And we overthrew a democratically elected leader in Guatemala because he thought the land should belong to the Guatemalans, not United Fruit. And just all around the world, there's all these places that the United States has invaded and destabilized and thrown out democratically elected governments. And so, and of course, Vietnam, the reason that our government decided to take over from the French was because, and refused to hold an election in Vietnam, was because Eisenhower recognized that if there was a free election in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh would have won. There was no question about it. And so, we don't stand, probably everybody on this call knows this, but I think we need to educate everybody else. We do not stand for freedom and democracy. Our foreign policy is based on oil greed, controlling oil around the world. And it's in addition to that, it's driven by this notion that anybody that has an idea of running their country in a way that somehow conflicts with our multinational corporate greed, we can't stand to have them in power. And so that means that working people in this country really have more in common with working people in Guatemala and Iran than they do with their own bosses in this country. But that takes a lot of educating. I think we can still be, I would just add to this, I kind of hear the criticism right away. Oh, you're not patriotic. You're not really, you're not pro-American. I mean, I think we can be proud of the values that are in our Declaration of Independence and the values that were in at least a chunk of our Constitution. We know that our Constitution also recognized slavery, so it's not 100% good, but we can be proud of the values of freedom and democracy. But we have to recognize that that's not what our government has stood for, and that it's not in our interests. And so I think there's just a lot of education to be done. How many Americans know that we have, depending on how you measure them, 700 or 800 bases outside of the borders of the United States, all around the world? Is that defense? What are we defending? Well, we're not defending democracy, and we're not defending our borders. So I think what we're defending is the rights of corporations to grab the resources from the rest of the world, whether it's cheap labor, or whether it's markets, or whether it's natural resources like oil and so forth. And so we just have to have a lot of education so that people understand that we're being sold a bill of goods, and we've been sold a bill of goods for a long time.
Well, the U.S. foreign policy might not be for freedom and democracy, but we know everyone here on this call is. Helen, I want to give you a chance to give any thoughts you had on how we keep this peace movement sustained, keep it going and growing.
Well, I agree that we need to do education and we need to get ourselves into the schools. I'm a member of the Peace and Justice Studies Association, and I often see posts on there that are contrary to what I think is the right thing regarding peace and justice. And so I often comment on that listserv. But I think that that's a way where we can influence people. Let's be in the high schools and the colleges, and let's listen to the young people that are speaking up right now and invite them in and see if we can be invited into their spaces as well, so that we can bridge this really large generational gap. And make sure that we understand that they have some valuable things to say, and methods we're not great at, like social media, but that we do have this historical perspective and experience in other ways. And it's really important for us to work together on lots of different issues.
Right, thanks very much. We're kind of approaching our time limit for this evening's program, but there are still a lot of questions we didn't get to yet. But I just want to remind everyone who's watching and tuning in that this is just the beginning of a full weekend of discussions and debates around the issues facing the peace movement. And as the big demonstrations in the streets have been confirming, there is a renewed peace movement right now, and its first demand, of course, is a ceasefire in Gaza. From union halls to the halls of Congress, There are voices that are rising for a just peace, a Palestinian state, to end terror and attacks on civilians, and for releasing captives on all sides. And we can be glad that there is a growing group of members of Congress who are pushing legislation for a ceasefire and to redirect some of that military spending that our panelists spoke about to domestic needs, to the needs that are of us, other people. So we hope that our viewers have gotten some new information that they didn't already know before these presentations, and hopefully they've taken down some of the ideas and websites that were shared about how they can get involved. I want to take just one chance also to make one more plug for our sponsor this evening, peoplesworld.org. Be sure to visit to get the latest news and analysis on the peace movement, on labor, the 2024 elections, and more, peoplesworld.org. I want to say thanks to Cambron Orr, Stephen Armstrong, Joe Sims, Taryn, the Peace and Solidarity Commission, the Political Action Commission, and I'm sure there are many others who were involved in putting this event together. So thanks to everyone for watching, but we're going to close it out going back to Winston Unity Hall for one more performance from Lucy Murphy, Lindsay Wilson, and this time Ben Groskup is joining them. So I'll go back to Manhattan for our closing performance. Thanks, everyone.
They're kind of missing in action.
Uh-oh. Are they making their way up?
They're on their way.
Okay.
They are
No
on
one hang up yet.
Well, while we're waiting for them, I'll just put in one more plug. Again, contact us at labor@veteransforpeace.org. And if you're in a union or if you're a veteran or both, contact us and we'd love to stay in touch.
And you can reach the golden rule at VFP, like Veterans for Peace, VFP Golden Rule Project at gmail.com, or our website, vfpgoldenrule.org.
And if you want to read a couple of articles about Golden Rule and its tour over the past several months, just go to People's World and search in the search box up there, Golden Rule Peace Boat, and you'll find some stories that were sent in by our volunteer contributors from a few different ports of call along the way. So I was actually looking through our archives, and the paper's been covering the Golden Rule for decades. So we'll keep at it as long as the boat keeps sailing.
And Rossana, how can we get in touch with your organization?
Here comes Military Families Speak Out. Pretty much just Google Military Families Speak Out. I don't quite remember the address, but there's only one Military Family Speak Out, so definitely you can reach us there. So now we have our singers to close us off.
All right.
Yeah, we need some notes. Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
Someone should make sure they zoom the camera out so we can see them again.
Listen.
Right. Thanks all for waiting. My name is Ben Groskup. We got Ben Bath here, Lindsay Wilson, and Lucy Murphy. How many mics? Just two more. Great. I don't think this doesn't go in. We're not getting. Don't use that. Don't use that one. So yeah. Okay. So that's what you need. Are you just gonna hold them up? Thanks all for waiting. While we're here, I just want to tell you, as the microphones are coming up to the stage, that this is a song that I wrote inspired by a book by the journalist Chris Hedges, who wrote a book in 2012 called Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. And in this book, he goes around to the sacrifice zones of the United States, those places that have been sacrificed to the logic of capitalist accumulation, places that have been despoiled as toxic wastes have been left there, as the lives of people in these places have been rendered superfluous to the capitalist system. And this concept of a sacrifice zone really applies very much to the work of building a peace movement, because war is another way of rendering entire populations superfluous. And that's one of the ways that capitalism actually functions, to render a whole section of the population superfluous to its mode of accumulation. So got my friends here to sing along and help me with this song. And I'm going to ask you guys who are sitting here in the hall also to help sing a little bit as well. It's called No More Sacrifice Zones. The army closed you in as they drove you from the plains. They're turning your homeland to a sacrifice zone. The company took the uranium, just the fallout remains. They're turning your homeland to a sacrifice zone where your story's been forgotten. We will make it known. Pine Ridge, you are not alone. Your homeland has been desecrated. The next could be our own. No more sacrifice zones. No more sacrifice zones. Try that with us. No more sacrifice zones. No more sacrifice zones. The state makes voting obsolete through emergency decrees. They're turning your city to a sacrifice zone. The cops occupy your street to bring you to your knees. They're turning your city to a sacrifice zone where your story's been forgotten. We will make it known. Ferguson, you are not alone. Sing it with us. Ferguson, you are not alone. Your city has been subjugated. The next could be our own. No more sacrifice zones. No more sacrifice zones. The coal men blew the mountain, killing everything nearby. They're turning your region to a sacrifice zone. The state refuses to help your people as you watch them die. They're turning your region to a sacrifice zone where your story's been forgotten. We will make it known. Appalachia, Appalachia, you are not alone. Your region has been desolated. The next could be our own. No more sacrifice zones. No more sacrifice zones. The fighter jets will cut you down to push you all away. They're turning your nation to a sacrifice zone. The bombs that kill your children came from the USA. They're turning your nation to a sacrifice zone where your story's been forgotten, where your story's been forgotten. We will make it known. We will make it known. Palestine, Palestine, you are not alone. Your nation has been decimated. The next could be our own. No more sacrifice zones. No more sacrifice zones. No more sacrifice zones. No more sacrifice zones.
Thank you very much for that original song. And one more time, thanks to the panelists and to all of our viewers this evening. Have a good Friday night.
Thank you, everyone.